Have you ever felt an unexpected connection with someone who completely changed your perspective on life? Sometimes love arrives in the most surprising packages, challenging everything you thought you knew about yourself. Get ready to hear a story that will stay with you long after it ends. A story about an age gap, unexpected love, and the courage to break free from expectations. This is a true gay story about a moment that changed everything. At 35, I never imagined an 18-year-old boy could do something that would stay with me forever. What happened that evening changed everything and left an imprint I can never forget. It all started on a summer evening. The air thick with the scent of fresh grass and the sky painted in hues of orange. I had just grabbed my usual espresso from the corner coffee shop, a small ritual in an otherwise routine life. As I stepped out, the warm breeze brushing against my face, I noticed him. He stood a few feet away, leaning casually against the street lamp, his arms crossed over his chest. His presence was magnetic. Something about the way he carried himself was impossible to ignore. His posture was relaxed, almost cocky, but his eyes were sharp and probing, like he could see right through me. He couldn't have been older than 18, but there was a confidence about him that seemed far beyond his years. I didn't mean to stare, but there was something captivating about him. Maybe it was the way the sunlight caught the golden strands in his dark hair, or the sharp line of his jaw that made him seem older than he was, or maybe it was the quiet self-assurance in the way he stood, like he owned the world and yet didn't care for its rules. Whatever it was, I felt a tug on my chest that I hadn't felt in years, a curiosity, a spark I couldn't explain. Before I could look away, he caught my eye and smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of his lips that sent a jolt through me. Then he started walking toward me. "Excuse me," he said, his voice smooth and deep with a hint of playfulness. "Do you have the time?" I glanced at my watch, my mind scrambling to process the simplest of tasks. It's 6:15. "Perfect," he said, his smile widening. "I'm supposed to meet someone here, but I'm a bit early. Mind if I wait with you?" I should have said no. I should have walked away and left him to his own devices. But something about him, his confidence, his easy charm, made it impossible to refuse. So, I nodded, and we sat down on the bench outside the coffee shop, the evening air wrapping around us like a warm blanket. He introduced himself as Ethan. Over the next half hour, we talked about everything and nothing. He told me about his love for sketching, how he spent hours drawing scenes from places he'd never been, and how he dreamed of traveling the world one day. There was an openness to him, a raw honesty that was both refreshing and disarming. In return, I found myself sharing things I hadn't talked about in years. My love for music, my regrets about the paths I didn't take, and the way I sometimes felt like life had passed me by. "You're interesting," he said suddenly, leaning back against the bench. His eyes sparkled with a mix of curiosity and mischief. "Most people around here are so predictable, but you're different." I laughed, though I wasn't sure why. "Different how?" I asked. "I don't know," he said, his gaze lingering on mine. "Like you got a story worth telling, but you're too scared to tell it." The comment hit me harder than it should have. He was just a kid. What did he know about my life, my struggles? But there was something in his tone, something uncomfortably accurate, that made it impossible to dismiss. As the minutes stretched into an hour, it became clear that his friend wasn't coming. At least that's what he claimed. When he finally stood up and shrugged, he said, "Looks like I got stood up," his voice tinged with mock disappointment. "Guess I'll have to find some other way to spend my evening." There was an unspoken question in his words, an invitation that hung in the air between us. I hesitated, the logical part of my brain screaming at me to walk away, but then he tilted his head, his smile returning, and I felt that tug in my chest again. "You're not busy, are you?" he asked, his tone casual, but his eyes sharp. "Let's grab a bite, my treat." And just like that, I found myself sitting across from him in a small diner down the street, the scent of frying oil and freshly brewed coffee filling the air. The place was nearly empty, the kind of hole-in-the-wall spot where time seemed to stand still. We shared a basket of fries and talked like old friends, though we'd only just met. Ethan had a way of drawing you in, of making you feel like you were the only person in the world who mattered. He told me about his frustrations with small-town life, how he felt trapped and longed for something more. His dreams of escaping to a big city, of seeing the world, were so vivid that I almost felt like I was dreaming them with him. "You ever feel like you're just existing?" he asked, his voice softer now, almost vulnerable. "Like there's so much more out there, but you're stuck in this endless loop." "Yeah," I admitted, surprising myself with the honesty in my voice. "I think everyone feels that way at some point." He smiled, but it was different this time. Smaller, quieter. "Maybe, but not everyone does something about it." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning. I looked down at my coffee cup, suddenly unable to meet his gaze. He had this way of cutting through the noise, of getting straight to the heart of things, in a way that left you feeling exposed. "Why'd you stop chasing your dreams?" he asked, his tone gentle but probing. "What made you give up?" I didn't have an answer, at least not one I could put into words. Instead, I shrugged and muttered something about responsibilities and the way life doesn't always go the way you planned. He didn't push me, but the look in his eyes said he wasn't satisfied with my response. As the night wore on, I found myself forgetting about the gap in our ages, about the fact that I barely knew him. There was an ease between us, a connection that felt both surprising and natural. When we finally left the diner, the streets were quiet, the hum of streetlights the only sound in the cool night air. He walked me to my car, his hands shoved into his pockets, his expression thoughtful. When we reached the driver's side door, he leaned against it, his gaze locking with mine. "Thanks for tonight," he said softly. "I didn't realize how much I needed this." "Me neither," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, neither of us moved. There was a tension in the air now, a pull that was impossible to ignore. I couldn't tell if it was real or if I was imagining it, but the way his eyes lingered on mine made my heart race. He smiled then, that same mischievous curve of his lips that had first drawn me in. "See you around," he said, stepping back and shoving his hands deeper into his pockets. I watched him walk away, his silhouette fading into the shadows, and felt a strange mix of relief and longing. As I drove home, his words echoed in my mind. It's never too late, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. Something had shifted that night, something I couldn't quite put into words, and deep down I knew this was only the beginning. I couldn't stop thinking about that night. Every detail played over and over in my head. The way Ethan's smile had lingered just a little too long, the spark in his eyes that seemed to light up the darkness, and the unspoken tension that hung between us as he walked away. It was maddening. I barely knew him, yet he had managed to slip under my skin in a way that no one else ever had. I told myself it was a one-off, a strange but fleeting encounter that would fade with time. But days passed, and he remained lodged in my mind like a splinter. By the end of the week, I had all but convinced myself to forget about him until I saw him again. It was early evening, and I was heading out of the grocery store, a bag of essentials tucked under my arm, when I heard a familiar voice call out, "Hey, stranger." I turned to see him leaning against the side of the building, his arms crossed over his chest and a playful smirk tugging at his lips. He looked even more relaxed this time, his hair slightly tousled and his shirt hanging loosely off one shoulder. "You following me?" I joked, though my pulse quickened at the sight of him. "Maybe," he said with a shrug, his grin widening. "Or maybe I just have impeccable timing." I rolled my eyes, trying to play it cool, but I couldn't hide the smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "What are you doing here?" "Waiting for you, apparently." He stepped closer, his eyes locking with mine. Fate works in mysterious ways, doesn't it? I laughed nervously, shifting the grocery bag in my arms. "If you say so. Let me carry that," he said, reaching for the bag. Before I could protest, his fingers brushed mine, sending a jolt through me. And for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. "It's fine," I stammered, but he was already walking ahead, the bag in his hand like it weighed nothing. "Come on," he called over his shoulder. "I'll walk you to your car." I followed him, my heart pounding in my chest. There was an ease to his movements, a confidence that made it impossible to look away. As we reached my car, he set the bag down on the trunk and leaned against it, his gaze steady. "Why are you really here?" I asked, my voice quieter now. He tilted his head, studying me with an intensity that made my stomach flip. "Maybe I just wanted to see you again." I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. There was something in his tone, something unguarded and honest, that left me momentarily speechless. "You're different," he said, his voice softer now. "Most people don't even notice me, but you see me." I swallowed hard, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. "Ethan, I don't," he interrupted, stepping closer. His gaze was unwavering, and the space between us seemed to shrink with every passing second. "Don't overthink it, just let happen." And then, before I could say another word, he kissed me. It was quick, almost hesitant, but it was enough to send my world spinning. His lips were soft and warm, and for a moment all the noise in my head disappeared. When he pulled back, his eyes searched mine as if he was waiting for me to say something. I began, but the words felt hollow even as I said them. "Why not?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because of my age? Because you think it's wrong? Or because you're scared?" I looked away, my chest tightening. "It's complicated. Life's always complicated," he said, his tone steady. "But that doesn't mean you run from it." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. He was right. I was scared of what this could mean, scared of what people would think, scared of feeling something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. But more than that, I was scared of him, of how easily he seemed to dismantle the walls I'd spent so long building around myself. "Let me in," he said, his voice so quiet it was almost a plea, "just for a little while." I didn't respond, but the look in my eyes must have given me away, because he smiled, a small, almost triumphant smile that made my knees weak. Before I knew it, we were back in my car, driving aimlessly through the quiet streets of our town. The conversation was easy, flowing naturally from one topic to the next, but the tension between us was palpable. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, Ethan leaned his head back against the seat. "Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" he asked, his voice heavy with something I couldn't quite place. "All the time," I admitted, surprised by my own honesty. He turned to look at me, his expression unreadable. "Then why don't you change it?" "Because it's not that simple," I said, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. "It is," he insisted. "You just have to decide what you want to go after it." His words stayed with me long after I dropped him off at his house. I told myself that would be the end of it, that I wouldn't let myself get pulled any deeper into whatever this was. But the next day, I found myself waiting outside the coffee shop, hoping to catch a glimpse of him. And when he showed up, grinning like he'd expected me to be there, I knew I was in trouble. Our meetings became more frequent after that. A stolen hour here, a late-night drive there. We never talked about what it meant or where it was going. We just let it happen. And with every passing day, the tension between us grew stronger, like a tightly wound spring ready to snap. It wasn't long before things escalated. One night, as we sat in my car on the edge of town, the city lights flickering in the distance, he reached over and placed his hand on mine. It was a simple gesture, but it set my heart racing. "You don't have to be afraid," he said, his voice steady. "I'm not going anywhere." I turned to look at him, my throat dry. "Ethan, this isn't stop," he said, cutting me off. "Stop thinking about what's right or wrong. Just be here with me." Before I could respond, he leaned in and kissed me again, this time with more certainty. It wasn't hesitant or fleeting, it was deep and consuming, the kind of kiss that left you breathless and wanting more. My hands found their way to his face, pulling him closer, and for a moment the world outside the car ceased to exist. But as the intensity of the moment grew, so did the weight of what we were doing. When we finally pulled apart, his eyes searched mine, his expression a mix of vulnerability and desire. "Tell me you feel this too," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't deny it anymore. "I do." "Then don't run," he said, his hand still resting on mine. "We can figure this out together." I nodded, my chest tight with a mix of fear and longing. I didn't know where this was going or how it would end, but in that moment I didn't care. All that mattered was him, his touch, his smile. his unwavering belief that this, whatever it was worth fighting for. But as I drove home that night, the weight of reality began to settle over me. This wasn't just a fleeting moment. It was the start of something that could unravel everything I thought I knew about myself and my life. And deep down, I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Little did I know, the real challenges were yet to come. The more time I spent with Ethan, the harder it became to keep my emotions in check. What had started as a series of fleeting encounters had grown into something much deeper, something I couldn't explain, but also couldn't deny. Each moment with him was a tug of war between exhilaration and fear, between giving in and pulling away. But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself that this was temporary, that it was a mistake, I kept going back to him. He had a hold on me, one I couldn't seem to break. One evening, as the late summer heat gave way to the cool breeze of dusk, Ethan called me. His voice was steady, calm, but there was an edge to it I couldn't quite place. "Can you come over?" he asked. "I need to talk to you." The request was simple, but the weight behind his words sent a shiver down my spine. Without hesitation, I grabbed my keys and headed out, the drive to his place feeling longer than it ever had before. When I arrived, he was sitting on the front steps of his house, his head tilted back as he stared at the sky. The soft glow of the porch light cast shadows across his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his jaw. "You look like you've been thinking too much," I said, trying to lighten the mood. He glanced at me, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Maybe I have." I sat down beside him, the silence between us heavy but not uncomfortable. After a moment, he turned to me, his expression more serious than I'd ever seen it. "I can't keep doing this if it's not real," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I need to know where you stand." The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Ethan, it's not that simple." "It is that simple," he interrupted, his gaze locking onto mine. "Either this means something to you, or it doesn't. I'm not a kid, no matter how much you might want to see me that way. I know what I want. The question is, do you?" His words hit me like a train, forcing me to confront feelings I'd been trying to ignore. I've been so caught up in the intensity of our connection, the rush of being around him, that I hadn't allowed myself to think about what it all really meant. But now, sitting there beside him, I couldn't avoid it anymore. "It means something," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper, "more than I can even explain." For the first time since I'd arrived, his expression softened. He reached out his hand, brushing against mine, and the warmth of his touch sent a jolt through me. "Then stop fighting it," he said, his voice steady. "Stop trying to convince yourself that it's wrong, because it doesn't feel wrong to me." I couldn't argue with him, not when he looked at me like that, not when every fiber of my being was screaming at me to let go of my fears and just be with him. Before I could stop myself, I leaned in, pressing my lips to his in a kiss that was both urgent and tender. His response was immediate, his hands sliding up to cup my face as he deepened the kiss, pulling me closer. The world seemed to fade away as we sat there on the steps, lost in each other. His touch was electrifying, his kisses both soft and demanding, and for the first time in years I felt completely alive. When we finally pulled apart, his forehead rested against mine, his breath warm against my skin. "I wanted to do that all day," he admitted, a small grin spreading across his face. I laughed softly, my hand still resting on his shoulder. "You're impossible, you know that?" "Maybe," he said, his grin widening, "but you like it." I couldn't deny it, not anymore. The lines I'd been so careful to draw between us had blurred beyond recognition, and the thought of walking away now felt unbearable. But as much as I wanted to stay in that moment forever, I knew it wasn't that simple. "We need to talk about this," I said, my voice hesitant, "about what we're doing, what it means." He nodded, his expression turning serious. "We can talk, but first, come inside." I followed him into the house, the air inside cool and quiet. He led me to his room, where the faint scent of cologne lingered in the air. It was a simple space, clean, uncluttered, with a few personal touches that hinted at who he was. A sketch pad lay open on the desk, and I couldn't help but glance at the intricate drawing he'd been working on. "You're really good," I said, gesturing to the sketch. "Thanks," he said, his voice soft. "It's one of the few things that helps me clear my head." We sat down on the edge of his bed, the tension between us building again as the silence stretched. He reached out, his fingers brushing against mine, and I felt the familiar warmth of his touch. "Tell me what you're thinking," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated, unsure of how to put my feelings into words. "I'm scared," I admitted finally, "of what this means, of what people will say, of how it'll change things." "It doesn't have to change anything," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "This is about us, not anyone else, and the only thing that matters is how we feel." I looked at him, his eyes full of conviction, and felt a wave of emotion wash over me. He was right. This wasn't about the world outside or the expectations I placed on myself. This was about him, about us, and the connection we shared. Without thinking, I leaned in again, our lips meeting in a kiss that was both passionate and desperate. We couldn't control ourselves, our bodies drawn to each other like magnets. His hands slid around my waist, pulling me closer, and for a moment I let myself forget about everything else. Our bodies wrapped around each other, our hearts beating as one. The feel of his skin against mine, the sound of his breath mingling with mine, it was intoxicating, and I didn't want it to end. We delved deeper, our love consuming us. Every touch ignited a fire that threatened to burn us both. I felt his warmth, his love, and his longing as we lost ourselves in each other. Our love became an all-consuming force. We were no longer two people, we were one, united in our passion. The world around us melted away, leaving only the two of us, lost in our desire. But as the night wore on, the reality of our situation began to creep back in. We were playing with fire, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it caught up to us. As much as I wanted to believe that we could keep this between us, the truth was far more complicated. "We can't keep this a secret forever," I said, my voice trembling. "People will find out eventually." "Let them," he said, his tone defiant. "I'm not ashamed of how I feel, and you shouldn't be either." His words were brave, but they only heightened my fears. I knew how unforgiving the world could be, how quickly people turned on you when you didn't fit their idea of what was right. And yet, looking into his eyes, I couldn't bring myself to let go. "I don't want to lose this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You won't," he promised, his hand tightening around mine. "As long as we're honest with each other, we'll figure it out." It was a promise I wanted to believe, but deep down I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Still, in that moment, with his arms around me and his heartbeat steady against mine, I allowed myself to hope, maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to make this work. But as I left his house that night, the weight of our choices settled over me like a heavy fog. The world outside felt colder, harsher, and I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. And as much as I wanted to hold on to the connection we shared, I couldn't ignore the voice in the back of my mind, whispering that this was only the beginning of the challenges we would face. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions I couldn't quite process. My mind was constantly at war with itself, half of me consumed by the feelings Ethan awakened in me, and the other half haunted by the consequences of what we were doing. Each time my phone buzzed with a message from him, my heart would leap, only to sink under the weight of my growing anxiety. We began to meet more frequently, stealing moments where we could. Sometimes it was as simple as grabbing coffee and talking about our days. Other times it was late-night drives to nowhere, the car filled with music and unspoken tension. The connection between us was undeniable, but so was the risk. I knew we were walking a tightrope, and every step felt more precarious than the last. It was quieter at night, the usual crowds replaced by an occasional jogger or a couple walking their dog. He was already waiting when I arrived, leaning against a tree with his arms crossed. The sight of him bathed in the soft glow of the street lights made my chest tighten in a way I was beginning to grow familiar with. "You look tired," he said as I approached. "Long day," I replied, forcing a smile. "Well," he said, reaching for my hand, "I'll make it better." His touch was grounding, a small act of reassurance that I desperately needed. We walked along the winding paths of the park, our conversation drifting from one topic to another. He talked about his sketches and how he wanted to capture the essence of places he'd never been. I told him about the pressures of my job, the expectations that weighed on me like an anchor. Somehow, he always knew what to say to lighten the load. "Have you ever thought about just letting go of it all?" he asked, his voice quiet. "Letting go?" I echoed, unsure what he meant. "Yeah," he said, stopping to face me. "All the expectations, all the rules you think you have to follow. What if you just live for yourself for once?" His words hung in the air, a challenge I wasn't sure I was ready to face. I looked away, the leaves rustling in the gentle breeze, providing a welcome distraction. "It's not that easy," I said finally. "Nothing worth it ever is," he replied, his tone soft but resolute. We sat down on a bench near the edge of the park, the quiet sounds of the night enveloping us. Ethan leaned back, his head tilted toward the sky, and let out a sigh. "I don't get you," he said after a moment. "What do you mean?" "You're so strong, so sure of yourself in so many ways," he said, turning to look at me. "But when it comes to what you want, you act like you're scared to reach for it." His words struck a nerve, but I couldn't bring myself to argue. He wasn't wrong. I'd spent so much of my life trying to meet everyone else's expectations that I'd forgotten how to listen to my own heart. "Maybe I'm scared," I admitted, scared of what people will think, scared of losing everything I've worked for. Ethan reached for my hand again, his grip firm but gentle. "You can't live your life for other people," he said. "At some point you have to decide what's more important, what they think, or what makes you happy." It was such a simple truth, but hearing it from him made it feel profound. I looked at him, his eyes filled with an honesty that left me breathless, and felt the walls I'd built around myself begin to crack. That night, we didn't say much else. Instead, we sat in comfortable silence, his hand never leaving mine. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. For the first time, I began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, this wasn't as impossible as I thought. But the world has a way of intruding on even the most perfect moments. It wasn't long before the cracks in our carefully constructed bubble began to show. It started with whispers, comments from coworkers, sideways glances from neighbors. At first, I dismissed it as paranoia, but it quickly became clear that people were noticing the time Ethan and I spent together. One day, as I was leaving the coffee shop, a colleague pulled me aside. "Hey, can I ask you something?" she said, her tone casual but her expression anything but. "Sure," I replied, though my chest tightened in anticipation. "Who's that kid you're always with? I've seen you two around a lot lately." The question was innocent enough, but it felt like a slap. My mind raced for an answer, something that wouldn't raise more questions. "He's just a friend," I said quickly. "Someone I'm mentoring." She raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced, but didn't press further. The encounter left me shaken, and for the first time, I began to see just how fragile our situation really was. When I told Ethan about it that evening, his reaction was a mix of frustration and defiance. "Who cares what they think?" he said, pacing back and forth in my living room. "It's none of their business." "Maybe not," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "but that doesn't mean they won't talk. And if this gets out what?" He interrupted, his tone sharp. "You'll lose your job, your reputation? Is that what you're so afraid of?" "Yes," I admitted, the words catching in my throat. "And it's not just about me, it's about you too. If people find out, they'll judge you, Ethan. They'll see you as some mistake I made." He stopped pacing, his expression softening as he looked at me. "Is that what you think this is? A mistake?" "No," I said quickly, my voice trembling. "But that's how they'll see it, and I can't protect you from that." "I don't need your protection," he said, stepping closer. "What I need is for you to stop hiding, to stop pretending this doesn't matter." His words hit me harder than I expected, and for a moment I couldn't speak. He was right. I was hiding from the world and from myself. But the fear of what we stood to lose was overwhelming. "I don't know how to do this," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to know," he said, his tone gentler now. "You just have to try." And so we tried. For weeks, We navigated the complexities of our relationship as best we could, balancing the intense pull we felt toward each other with the ever-present fear of discovery. We found solace in stolen moments, in the quiet corners of our lives where no one could see us. But the weight of secrecy began to take its toll, and the cracks in our resolve grew harder to ignore. One night, as we sat in my car on the outskirts of town, Ethan turned to me with a look I hadn't seen before, a mix of sadness and determination. "I can't keep doing this," he said, his voice breaking slightly, hiding, sneaking around. "It's not enough anymore." My chest tightened at his words. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we need to make a choice," he said, his gaze unwavering. "Either we stop running and face this together, or we let it go." The thought of letting him go was unbearable, but so was the idea of exposing ourselves to the judgment and scrutiny that awaited us. I looked at him, his face illuminated by the faint glow of the dashboard lights, and knew I couldn't lose him. "I want to fight for this," I said, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. "For us." A small smile broke through his sadness, and he reached for my hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "Then we fight," he said simply. It wouldn't be easy, I knew that. The road ahead was filled with uncertainty and challenges we couldn't yet predict. But as we sat there, our fingers intertwined, I felt a flicker of hope because no matter what came next, we had each other, and that, I realized, was worth everything. Wow. What a powerful story about unexpected love and the courage to choose happiness. If you resonated with this story, please give this video a thumbs up. And if you want to hear more emotional and romantic LGBT stories, make sure you subscribe to LGBT Stories and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of our new uploads. What did you think of this story? Let us know your thoughts and feelings in the comment section below. We love hearing from you and building our community here. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.